A gigantic yippee-yippee-ki-yay thank you to Factor 75 for sponsoring today's video. Ah, the Wild Wild West, a region and time that are filled with so many things, but probably most importantly, debauchery as well as, well, you guessed it, a little bit of death. Some might say it would be darn near impossible to survive out here on your own. Well, today we're going to give it our best shot, the old college try. Fair warning, I did drop out. We do have a bit of a leg up on the wildlife out here at least, as we're packing around our grandpappy's pistol, assuming they get close enough that this little thing can hit them. I should also point out that this planet is absolutely packed to the gills with frontier as well as tribal factions alike that we can either coexist with or go to war with. First rule of the West though is securing some food, and that's exactly what we were struggling to do right off the bat, but eventually we got the hang of it. The next thing we would need to do is cut down some cacti, that way we could acquire some resources such as wood to build a proper shelter, or as proper of a shelter as it's gonna get out here. Thankfully, the nearby ruins of a lost mining city was still here, with plenty of tables as well as a few urns that we could decorate our camp with. And using some steel, we could make a proper place to put our buttocks while we eat. While the night was still young though, we cut up our iguana and made our very first meal. Some nice, delicious iguana steaks that we promptly filled our little tummy with. You know, speaking of delicious meals to fill your tummy with, that brings me to today's sponsor, Factor 75. Get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders using my link. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Look, you can support the channel by clicking my link and subscribing to Factor. Every purchase helps me create more content like this for you guys. It is because of Factor 75 that this video is even possible. You can get chef-prepared meals on the table in only 2 minutes. Yes, you heard me, 2 minutes with Factor's ready-to-eat meals. That way you can get back outside and soak up some more of that summer sun before it ends. Adding on to that, Factor's meals eliminate the hassle of prepping, cooking, or even cleaning up. You just simply heat and savor all that delicious food. And we're talking gourmet meals here. You can literally try gourmet meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini, and asparagus, just to name a few. Factor 75 is the real deal, my friends. Now, the Factor 75 website is extremely easy to use and to navigate as well, and personally, I was looking for something that might be low in calories and carbs because I'm currently on a cut, a bit of a diet, right? And as you can see, they have calorie smart and keto options available right on the homepage. And in a few months, when I plan on doing a clean bulk, they also have some protein-packed meals available. And of course, they also have vegan and vegetarian options available. And look, in conclusion, I just can't stress enough how convenient Factor 75 makes it for you to not only eat good, but to eat clean and eat how you want. But like I mentioned, use my link in the video description to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders, or scan the QR code that you see now. Once again though, a massive thank you to Factor 75 for sponsoring me today, but now back to the video. And with our hunger satiated, we could finally get a good night's rest. You know what, maybe the Wild West isn't that bad after all. Perhaps I've spoken too soon, as I did end up spotting a mountain lion lurking outside our camp. If we weren't inside this canopy, I have a feeling we would be dinner for tonight. The next morning, we had a beautiful sight to behold. It would appear a rattlesnake and an iguana decided to take each other out. This is what we in the West call an opportunity. This one in particular was another opportunity to fill up our bellies, this time around with some rattlesnake bites. Though the local wildlife isn't exactly what I would call sustainable food. At least not as much as the crops that we could be growing, which will be a constant source of food, and we won't actually have to hunt for it, so that's a plus. We ended up growing some cotton for cloth, that way we can make a proper tent as well as some clothing. We would also end up growing some hay grass, as it's for a special construction project, but it would also be useful if we got any animals. And then last but not least, we're also growing rice for food. As the night was coming to an end, we also spotted a beautiful pioneer woman out here. Similar to the the rattlesnakes of the area, beautiful but extremely dangerous. Either way though, she had some stuff to trade, but we didn't want to buy anything off of her, and she didn't want to purchase anything from us, so we just went on our separate ways. Shockingly, we would spot that mountain lion that was lurking around the camp dead as a doorknob not too far away from us. Out here, even the deadliest of predators can quickly become prey. I was then informed that Jim Bob here had named his Peepaw's pistol the Coyote, which I found quite interesting since coyotes most likely eat snakes and possibly iguanas if they had the chance, and that's what we've been shooting with it. We then began working on some defenses. Because of the lack of resources in the desert here, we decided to build some little mud mounds that we could hide behind if we were to get into a gunfight. One little bit of wood we had collected thus far we would use to build a tailoring bench, which would then enable us to make some patch leather. Said patch leather would be absolutely perfect for an exquisite cowboy hat. Not only will this hat protect our sensitive little eyes from the sunlight, but we also look sharp as a razor. We found a steel vein in the side of one of our mountains and began digging at it. The reason we needed steel is for a melee weapon. In particular, we would actually end up making a hatchet. Not only will it help us when we're cutting down cacti, but if anybody gets a little too close, we could give them a good little poke with it. Well, speak of the devil, we have our very first raid. Although this chap is carrying a melee weapon and a shield, so I don't think I want to use my hatchet. We would try to run away and fire at him. Eventually, this ended up working. This was to be expected out here. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Even with it being self-defense, I don't think that poor Jim Bob here really anticipated what this would feel like. I caught him moping by the fire for a few hours, no doubt contemplating what had just happened. I think I'm going to give him a little bit of space. Eventually, though, he would have to pull himself together so that we could do some trading with these nice gentlemen. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford their pistol even after selling everything that they would be willing to buy, so we ended up just making a little bit of silver off of them. A bit of time later, we had our very first harvest of rice, which was quite exciting as we wouldn't have to hunt down all the iguana anymore. To store all this rice, we would end up building a steel food basket. Now, this will not prevent it from rotting, but this will prevent it from deteriorating in rain and other weather conditions, of course. Speaking of which, the rain was pelting poor old Jim Bob's head as he was getting a first harvest of our cotton plants as well. With this cloth, we'd be able to build ourselves some proper amenities like this nice tent. Ooh la la. Just as a fine cowboy duster, which we immediately began working on, but... Stupid crocodiles. Hi-ya! Yeah, I think that'll do the trick. Well, at the very least, our gun-slinging, croc-killing desperado has a very nice duster to go along with his hat. By this point, I realized I'd rather have a much more trustworthy source for wood, so we ended up planting some fiber corn. I did have tree sowing research unlocked when we started, but unfortunately, Jim Bob's plant skill isn't high enough. We ended up having a gunsmith trader show up, but we didn't have near enough money to purchase anything, and they didn't want to buy anything, so we just kind of let them hang out around the camp until they left. For the last few days, we've also been working on cutting down all the cacti in the area for all the glorious wood. Using this wood, we would end up building a very small cabin for him to stay in. This way he's less exposed to the elements. So much for that rough and tough cowboy. Look at him, he looks like a little rotisserie chicken all snuggled up in that bed. Sometime later, we had a fella by the name of Joey who claimed that his ex-lover chased him away from his home and he wanted to stay with us here for a while. Well, Jim Bob is a bit of a sucker for a sob story, so we accepted. Now, I do realize this could be a dangerous mistake, but we need a helping hand around here, especially with building things, and I mean, look at that construction skill. Besides, we would force him to drop his pistol before we let him enter the camp. Not only would this ensure our safety, but his as well, because now we wouldn't have to shoot him if he gets a little too out of line. We would then have the opportunity to name our faction and our settlement. I ended up going with Jim Bob's Mules because we're very hard workers, and also Mule Meadow because, I don't know, it seemed fitting, even though this is a desert. I don't know, I'm trying, okay? We would end up facing quite the fire due to a dry thunderstorm. We eventually got it put out, but not before it took many of our crops with it. Luckily though, we still have plenty of resources like hay that we could use to create a covered carriage. Yes, I know, exquisite, isn't it? Don't be jealous. Okay, maybe you could be a little jealous if you like. This bad boy should help us out with any trade missions things that we do with other factions though, as it can haul quite a bit of resources, as well as guns, food, furniture, anything that we don't need anymore. We are ready. Perhaps if we have some constant silver pouring into this area, we could develop it into our own little town, a bustling little village. I also wanted to mention that I spotted some hyenas lurking around our camp, and I actually sent Jim Bob out there to attempt to tame them. Unfortunately, this failed, but we'll keep trying. But just like that, my friends, it is now day 25, and in case you're new around these parts, I feel it's important to mention that every 25 days here on the Rat Knight channel, we will be facing a custom boss battle. It's kind of like a tradition where I torture myself. Most notably for the boss battle, we'll be going up against the Slicer gang, a local gang that is made up of hired thugs and mercenaries. And this, my friends, is their leader. Appropriately going by the name of Slicer, she carries around a large handheld mortar as well as some type of claymore sword, it would appear. It's also quite well known that she is a veteran of some past war, but decided to desert the military after finding a mysterious golden cube on one of her missions, said to have drove her insane. Well, I don't know about all that, but I think a few pieces of lead to the old sternum should do the trick on her. We couldn't exactly line up a shot from this distance, so we would send Joey down to engage her in melee combat, holding her still enough that Jim Bob could try to shoot her in the back. In doing so though, Joey had managed to knock the mortar out of her hands. Jim Bob took it and shot her. Well, he actually shot Joey and killed him by accident. Oopsie. Now the Jim Bob's the only cowpoke left. Slicer would try to chase him down, even kind of getting to him at one point there, but she didn't manage to hit him with the sword, thank God. On the contrary, Jim Bob managed to shoot her several times, but her bulletproof waistcoat was really living up to its name. But after an extreme amount of blood loss, the next bullet was so painful it caused her to collapse into the sand, dropping all of her weapons. She's simply unconscious though, not dead, and that's important because normally we could try to recruit someone, but she's unwaveringly loyal to the Slicer gang, and I don't feel like dealing with that. So we would simply take all of her gear and use her very own sword to finish her off. Now that she's gone, she won't be needing this masterwork Plastil bulletproof waistcoat. Oh my. Oh, and she also dropped that strange golden cube that all the rumors were about. I decided that we would keep it and maybe try to sell it. Ah, yes, and we also have Joey's corpse that will need to be buried. I'm very sorry about killing you, old friend, although we really didn't know each other all that well, I suppose. It's just part of doing business out in these parts, friend. I then noticed late one evening that Jim Bob here was messing around in the sand, and it says that he's obsessed with the cube. It caused him to fall into a daze, and he's now building statues of the cube. Well, this can't be good. Maybe the rumors about Slicer's little cube insanity are true. We need to try to get rid of that cube ASAP. It's hard enough on one's mind being out here all alone with the cacti and the rattlesnakes. All the while the sun is beating down on the brim of your brow. Like I had mentioned earlier, I would like to try to sell that cube as well as many other things that we had managed to collect, so we began loading them up into our wagon and off we went on a little trading mission to a nearby frontier town. But on our way there, we would also be stopping in at a friendly tribal settlement as well to do a little bit of trading with them, and this whole trade mission was actually going quite well and we were making a good bit of silver. However, nobody actually wanted to buy the golden cube. Not at all. Most likely because they too have heard the rumors. So, reluctantly, the only thing that we could really do would be to abandon the cube in the forest. And that's exactly what we did. For the sanity of Jim Bob, it had to be done. Now that we've made a little bit of pocket change and gotten rid of the cube, it would be time to go back home. But on our way back, we would stop in at a nearby item stash. There didn't appear to be any enemies. It's possible that the Slicer gang hasn't found out about this little hidey hole yet. Within was a very strangely designed bow that was capable of firing 3 arrows at once, so of course we took it. We had finally arrived back home, and we actually ended up purchasing 2 chickens while we were out at the frontier town. These little buggers are going to make us plenty of eggs for breakfast. However, you know just as well as I that the desert here is quite a dangerous place for man, let alone for poultry. And because of that, we would quickly deconstruct some runes, that way we could use the blocks that we got from them to begin building some brick fencing to try and protect our little egg layers as best we could. However, late into the night, I noticed that Jim Bob seemed very stressed out. It would seem that he's going through an extreme cube withdrawal. The amount of stress this put on him would eventually cause him to go into a temporary coma, dropping to the ground right next to the campfire as the rain was pouring upon his head. It would seem that leaving that cube out in the forest was a horrific mistake. There's no way for Jim Bob to survive in a coma for 6 days lying out on the ground. This was the end for Jim Bob. Yeah, I got you, didn't I? You think I would leave that thing out in the forest without knowing that this would happen? No. We already had a quest where a visitor was offering to help us. Naturally, with my foresight, I knew that we would be able to accept this when this happened to Jim Bob, and of course we did, so Theo here has joined us. And as you can see, Theo also has quite the skill set in terms of melee and cooking at the very least. He would quickly sweep up Jim Bob and put him into his nice comfy little bed. You rest there, pal, because we have got plenty of work to do and you're gonna need your strength for day 50, which realistically is just around the corner when you think about it, but that doesn't mean that we weren't having our fair share of hardships before then. As a matter of fact, here's one now, a man-hunting pack of koala bears. They may appear to be cute and cuddly, but these are a devious sort of little creatures, thirsting for human blood. You know, a good question is how did they even get out here? Maybe they fell off the back of some type of circus wagon. I don't care. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, there wasn't much that Theo was really all that good at, so when he wasn't fighting off the local wildlife and or circus animals, we would have him just kind of deconstruct some runes so that we have resources. Finally, after several days, Jim Bob was awake and of sound mind, and he was also finally cured of his obsession with that disgusting cube. Kids, that just goes to show, anytime a stranger drops a golden cube on the ground, you shouldn't pick it up and start worshipping it. Lesson learned. With Jim Bob out of commission for so many days, I felt like I was completely behind on building our town, so I decided to kind of focus on that for quite a while, specifically these ruins here that were right next to our camp. As I mentioned, I believe this was some sort of abandoned mining town or something of that effect, so this was most likely a storage depot for coal and stone and rocks and whatever else they were mining out of these mountains. However, for us, this beautiful stone structure shall be our Hall of Justice, our courthouse, our main vein at the end of the city. Because truly, what is a society without law and order? Since we don't exactly belong to any nation or faction, we shall be declaring our own with our very own flag. An extremely simplistic design for the flag here. As you can see, we have the rising sun to symbolize the rising sun of the desert, along with the red background to symbolize the heat of the desert, as well as the white border to symbolize the beautiful clouds. For a time, we would focus on harvesting our crops, specifically our fiber corn, and we would also try to expand and create new growing zones for fiber corn, as most of our town is going to be built out of wood. We would begin working on a proper mess hall, essentially just a place that we could store food, cook meals, and enjoy those meals in each other's company. We also built a beautiful wood stove, which was much more efficient than a campfire, but also would heat up the room when it was winter time, which was very useful. And let me tell you, you could fry one heck of an egg on that bad boy too. A bit of time later, and we ended up having an escaped convict by the name of Veronica who was wanting to join us here. Now, I know I said we're all about law and order, but as far as we're concerned, we're the only law and order around these parts, so we accept it. Besides, we'll keep a good eye on her, and upon further inspection, it would appear she's pretty good at talking, so she'll be a great warden, and she could do a little mining for us, and maybe a little shooting if need be. Now look, she wasn't exactly the best shot, but she did bring her very own rifle, which was pretty cool, so we would let her do a good bit of hunting for us as well against some dromedaries in the area. The dromedaries didn't exactly appreciate it though, and we had to help her out a little bit. After doing so, not only would we have dromedary meat, but we would also have the head of the animal, which we could use for taxidermy. We could put it in our kitchen, or anywhere we would like, but this one went in our kitchen, and it really beautifies the place. I think it ties the room together. We We would then end up having a raid from a local tribe, unfortunately, although it only seemed to be one gentleman carrying around an old-timey musket. Most likely smooth bore, meaning it's not very accurate, but no doubt it packs one heck of a punch, so we'll have to be very careful here and try to keep our distance. We tried that for a little bit of time though, and then we ended up equipping a bayonet onto our musket, and Veronica began poking him a little bit while Jim Bob came from the side. And that ended up seeming to do the trick. After that, we would begin expanding our proper accommodations in the form of a tent and some more camping equipment, and then of course we would also begin working just on the outside of our kitchen on a nice chess table. Believe it or not, everyone's a bit sick of cloud watching, so this should be a nice form of recreation. Then late one evening, we had a colonist named Mullen who had arrived and wanted to join. Not too much in terms of her backstory, which was a little odd, but we did end up accepting, and she also had a pretty decent bit of skills, I guess. She wasn't very good at much. We all gathered around the fire that night to begin kind of getting more of her story. We were a little bit suspicious of her, to say the least. But we had no time to interrogate her, as it was now day 50, and cowpokes, you know what that means, yet another boss battle. For day 50, we're going to be taking on a couple of Impid siblings known as the Jade Twins. They hail from an Impid tribe in the desert mountains who, you might have guessed, seem to see jade as some type of holy material. Though we respect their religion and their culture, we're going to stomp these two into oblivion and mount those jade masks on our wall. It should be noted that the bow being used by the female sibling was very powerful, so we had to keep our distance. As for her brother though, we would trample him with our horse carriage. Shockingly, he didn't die. As you might imagine, the sister seeing her brother stomped into the ground was a little bit disheartening for her, so she decided to flee the area. She had managed to flee the area, but he was still here, and best of all, he was not unwaveringly loyal, which is kind of surprising. Now, normally in my 100 days videos, I don't try to recruit the bosses or anything like that, or even have that as a possibility due to the fact that they normally will have some type of body modifications making them very OP, but these guys don't actually have that since it's the Wild West. He does, however, have some pretty high resistance, so I guess that kind of makes it fair. Now, taking him prisoner though made me realize that we need some proper prisons, and where better than at the end of our courthouse, so that's exactly what we began building. However, this was interrupted. You remember Mullen and how we were super suspicious of her? Yeah, it turns out she's an enemy from the Slicer gang. She turned on Jim Bob and Theo in the dead of night, trying to shoot them in the back. Theo bopped her on the head with his bottle though, and she was dead. We'll need to be more careful with who we allow to join us from now on. Speaking of which, it was almost time for Theo to depart the town and go about his merry little way, but that didn't sit too well with us, as I wasn't ready to let him leave. I wanted him to stay here. And to make sure that that happened, I decided to arrest him. We threw him into the town jail, and we would actually begin trying to recruit him. After that though, we began working on some more proper housing for everyone, as well as some more pathing around the town, that way everyone knows where they're going. But we were once again being attacked by the Slicer gang, this time a lone desperado wielding a rifle. He caught us right in the middle of construction right around noon, and a shootout began right in the middle of town. The poor fool was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely out of his wits. And that led him down a path that ends right here, right now. It was around about this time that I realized our Impid boss by the name of Dowen was missing his left and right leg as well as his left arm. We would attempt to do surgery, but this would fail as we were trying to install a peg leg. We'll try again when we have better medicine. I know there's a lot I could do to this room to make it a lot better, but I don't know, I'm sticking with the Wild West jail cell theme. In the meantime though, we would further increase the amount of structures in our town by adding a proper storage facility to try and hold all of our goods, as up until this point we've just kept them in the courthouse. Late one evening though, we had a doctor by the name of Sleepy who was wanting to join the colony. Just what we needed, I thought to myself, after failing to perform surgery, but she's kind of more of a barbaric medieval style doctor, so her medical skill is actually very low. Either way, we're happy to have her though. There are numerous other ways that she can contribute to the colony, such as protecting it with her increased melee skill. By this point, we had also finally recruited Theo back into our ranks. It didn't take much, we just had to tell him we were sorry about arresting him, and we really didn't want him to leave, pretty please. He and Jim Bob sat down at the table to have a nice conversation and to make up over a couple of brewskis. I got a little bit impatient waiting around for a quest, or some enemies, or somebody to drop some good medicine, and then I began to think that this is the Wild West that most likely won't be coming, so I tried my hand at surgery once more, and it ended up working. I also made sure to clean the room this time. We would also end up having a stranger approach by the name of Brody with pure white eyes who claims to have mastered some type of folk knowledge, meaning that he doesn't need to sleep or eat. Though he is a bit strange, we didn't really see him as a threat, so we ended up accepting him into the town. We're quickly becoming a city of misfits, but that's completely fine by me. Brody here is going to be a great cook. As you might remember earlier on in the video, we had completely failed to tame any animals for the town, but not this time. We ended up taming a zebra. It's no Kentucky stallion, but it is shaped like a horse and we can ride it, so good enough. I also ended up naming it Merlin because riding it around was magical. Anyhow though, we had detected a logging worksite by a nearby Impid tribe, separate from the one that the bosses came from earlier. We really needed some logs, and since they had so many of them, we thought we'd just help ourselves. Now that's not to say they didn't try to put up a pretty decent fight. I mean, they did, but all they really had were some throwing rocks, so, you know. Thankfully though, this lady hadn't died, so we would begin healing her. That way we could take her back to our town and begin the recruitment process. We also located their log storage, but this is by far not enough, so we began deconstructing their structures here at the camp. That way we could take them back home with us as well for our own construction projects. The first of which would be a proper speaking podium, as well as a large table with chairs. That way we could delegate inside the courthouse. Then I realized we had managed to finally recruit the Impid boss into our ranks, a vital part of the community now, I'm sure, as he would be helping out with new construction projects like this saloon that we're building. Because is a town even a town if it doesn't have a saloon? No. No, I don't think it is. We had placed quite a few recreational items within the saloon, such as a billiards table, but I think the favorite among everyone in town seems to be the poker table. But my dear friends, it is now day 75, meaning of course that it is time for our third boss battle. It would seem that we're going to be dealing with the Slicer gang once more. However, this appears to be Slicer Jr., the daughter of Slicer, of course, and she has also brought along a hound master from the gang with several Labrador retrievers. Make no mistake, my friends, the Slicer gang feeds these puppers gunpowder, so they're quite vicious. They were the first to attack us, as Slicer Jr. and the hound master would keep their distance for a moment. Unfortunately, the dogs would get a hold of Brody, and they ended up killing him. But his sacrifice gave us a moment to catch them on fire with Impid breath. Slicer Jr. would make her move with her grenades, but we all moved in quite quickly on her. After we had managed to take her down, next up was the Hound Master and a handful of his doggos. But they too would quickly fall before our might. But even so, we had lost one of our own during this battle. Retribution and revenge must be had for this catastrophic loss. Funny enough, we had just so happened to take Slicer Jr. into our prison instead of killing her out on the battlefield. And though we didn't have any gallows, justice would be served nonetheless, right here in the middle of the courthouse. Everyone seemed quite satisfied with the execution of Slicer Jr., and they'll actually have a mood buff for quite a little while. We also held a funeral for Brody, but I forgot to get footage of that. It also went well. Late one evening, we had some visitors who were coming to town, so we decided to sell them a pistol as well as a crossbow and some cloth. We made a teeny bit of silver off of it, but most importantly, we bought a book called The Fragments of Shadows. It is some type of manifesto written about someone's experiences with a golden cube that's quite beautiful and that also destroys minds. Does that sound familiar by chance? A little bit of time later, and I had sent Jim Bob out to try and tame more zebras. That way, eventually, everyone in town should have their own striped stallion. Of course, though, we needed somewhere to put them all, so we ended up building a very small pen just off the side of Sleepy's house. For right now, we're only going to have a few of them, because really that's all we can afford to feed. Now, we would also be further expanding our town on the western side of our town, moving our camping equipment over just a little bit to add in some new housing as well as a production room. To assist us further in our trade missions though, we would also end up creating an ox cart. That way we can haul plenty of resources that we plan on selling to neighboring towns. After that, we finally built a building that was specifically created for research. Now, this is something I like to do with our other forms of production like smithing and stone cutting as well, where they all have their own individual buildings. But since we finally have a research table, we're going to begin researching gunpowder defense, which will unlock a mortar, an organ gun, as well as a 12-pounder cannon. Though it must be stated that it is going to take quite a while for us to complete this research. So, I just wanted to sit back and take a moment to marvel at our little town that we've created. Boy, oh boy, is it beautiful. But it is quite small, and I have some pretty big plans that can't be accomplished in 100 days. Now, a lot of the time for my 100 days videos, I never take it past that point because I just like playing around with the mods and doing different situations. This time is different. If you guys want to, I do want to continue this indefinitely up until the point we hit, I don't know, 1,000 days maybe, so be sure to let me know. At some point, we ended up having some zebra that wandered in, and these zebra were actually previously part of a caravan, and thus they had plenty of items in their saddlebags. So to get the items, there was only one rational solution. Yes, indeed, we began hunting down all of these zebra, shooting them, lighting them on fire, cutting them up with a battle axe, really whatever it took. And this way, not only would we have all of these items, but we would also have some delicious charred zebra meat. Nothing goes to waste around these parts, friend. After that, though, if you believe it, it would seem that the Slicer gang has returned once more for yet another beating. At this point, I'm not quite sure when they'll learn that we're not so easy to push around. Now, we are a couple of silly billies here, and we hadn't yet built any defenses, so we were taking cover in our doorways, and then we would begin to make a strategic retreat to the middle of town. This way we could lure them one by one through the city streets until we killed them all. Occasionally we would get lucky enough to have some fun with our covered wagon, and we would trample them as well. With their numbers completely depleted, those who were not quite dead decided to run away like a bunch of cowards. Though some of us were slightly injured during the battle, I do feel like it was quite worth it to engage them head on, as now we have quite a few weapons that we can sell during our next trading expo. But now with day 100 just around the corner, I decided to start focusing on some resource collection such as steel and even some components, that way we can use them for our new defenses. I would also put some focus and effort into beautifying our homes because happy townspeople make for much better fighters, and they have a less likely chance to be in a mental break state when we need them. Late one night we had also finally managed to recruit the impid that we had taken prisoner from the logging camp so many days ago. She would make for a wonderful addition to the town, and she would also be very useful in helping us build some steel barricades to hide behind for the day 100 boss battle, as well as any other threats that we might encounter. Finally though, we had completed our research into gunpowder defenses, which will now allow us to build the mortar, the cannon, everything that we had mentioned previously, and so we began doing that, starting with the mortar, and then we would also end up building the cannon. I'm not gonna lie to you though, we built these, and you know, I do the boss battles custom, I create them, but I don't control which side of the map that they spawn on, and so these didn't spawn anywhere near the defenses, so I didn't use them at all. But I'm sure if we continue this past 100 days, they'll come in handy. Finally though, my friends, it is now day 100, and we did it! We made it to 100 days, although we still have our last boss battle to deal with. Interestingly enough, it is once again the Slicer gang, but this time around they have sent some of their elite riflemen. Unlike the normal groups of thugs that may attack us from the Slicer gang, these riflemen are hardened veterans with the eyes of eagles. Thankfully though, we would be able to hide behind our barricades, though we were quickly taking a lot of damage. Luckily, some of our people had rode in on the zebras and managed to scurry around the enemies, lighting them on fire, causing a lot of chaos, and thus distracting our enemies, giving us an advantage. It was during this time, with a lot of strategy and luck, we had managed to kill many of the riflemen that were nearby. After killing the majority of their forces, the others would begin to flee, but they were still taking many shots at us, injuring several of our cowboys. 3 or 4 of them ended up getting away, but I'm sure we'll see them again. One of their surviving members that we didn't finish off actually had some pretty decent skills, so we decided that we would end up capturing them. Even so though, it would be quite a while before before we managed to recruit them, as they had very, very high resistance. But my friends, we have finally finished day 100. I want to thank you all ever so much for watching today's video. I hope you have enjoyed truly. Like I mentioned, if you guys want to see 200 days, 300 days, if you want to keep this going, be sure to let me know, and be sure to support the video with a like or whatever. I normally don't like to ask that because it's the typical YouTuber thing to do, but it does let me know that you guys really enjoy the video and that you want to see it continued, so if you wouldn't mind, I would very much appreciate it. And you know, I want to mention, I am all about what you guys actually want to see here on the channel. You know, to me, this channel is just as much mine as it is your all's, right? And I bring that up because I recently made a community post about a month ago talking about how my Fallout 100 Days save was kind of messed up and that kind of thing, and I had said whichever, you know, suggestion from you guys gets the top comment, the most liked comment, whatever, would be the next 100 Days video, and I'm not really obliging by that, like I said, by my word, by doing this video today, as the top comment was by our good friend just_dog110, who had a great idea about a 100 Days at Dune, which I assume is, of course, in reference to the books and the movies, but I do want to do that, and I think that's a great idea. The only problem is I'm not familiar with Dune at all, and I don't want to just do it to do it. I want to do it because you guys want to see it, and because I know what I'm talking about, and because I feel like I can do it justice in a video, right? I want to be able to make the best video that I can, so I'm only simply putting it on the back burner. I don't want you guys to think that I've completely forgotten about that. But my friends, I love you ever so much, and once again, I hope you have enjoyed. I will see you next time. Goodbye.